Saipan, July 1944. The first light of dawn touches the horizon. Inside wet foxholes, American soldiers tighten their grip around the cold steel of the Colt M1911A1. Across the field, thousands of Japanese troops prepare for the largest Banzai charge of the Pacific War, their voices echoing the cry, Tenno, Heika, Banzai, into the still air before sunrise. Moments later, the battlefield erupts. Amid waves of shouting men, Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien draws both of his .45 pistols and fires until the last round, determined to hold his ground. This is not just the story of a battle. It is the story of two philosophies of war, one born from American industrial logic, the other from Japan's samurai devotion. Through the smoke, the fire, and the steel, the M1911A1 proved why Japanese soldiers came to call it the 45 monster. And when the battle for Saipan ended, the world learned a harsh truth. Engineering could save a man's life, while honor alone could not stop a bullet. July 1944, Saipan, Mariana Islands. It was not just another island. It was the strategic hinge that would determine the fate of the Pacific. From this tiny piece of land, American B-29 bombers could finally reach Tokyo, and Japan knew it. Before sunrise, the salty winds swept across the island's hills, through muddy trenches filled with sweat, blood, and fear. There, men of the U.S. 27th Infantry Division waited for what they knew was coming. The largest and most desperate Banzai charge of the Pacific War. In one of those trenches, Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien, commander of the 1st Battalion, 105th Regiment, checked his sidearms one last time. Two Colt M1911A1 pistols, each loaded with 7 rounds of .45A CP. Less than 2 kilometers away, Japanese soldiers were preparing for their own final assault. Many of them drank heavily, wrote farewell notes, and bowed toward the east. The air was thick with incense, sake, and fatalism. In their holsters rested the Type 14 Nambu, a pistol that represented both the pride and the limits of Japanese engineering. Neither side could have imagined that, in just a few hours, these two pistols, symbols of two civilizations, would meet in a test written in blood. To understand Saipan, we must go back more than 3 decades, to the year 1911. In the United States, a genius named John Moses Browning had just finished a pistol that would redefine modern warfare, the Colt M1911. He believed in one principle: if your weapon fails when you need it, all strategy is meaningless. The pistol passed every military test, firing 6,000 consecutive rounds without a single jam. It used the new .45 ACP cartridge, heavy, slow, and devastatingly powerful. In the trenches of France during World War I, and later in the jungles of the Philippines, the M1911 earned its reputation for stopping power. A single well-placed round could end a fight instantly. Meanwhile, in Japan, engineer Kojiro Nambu pursued a different dream. He designed the Type 14 Nambu, introduced in 1926. It fired an 8 by 22 millimeter round, lighter, faster, but with half the momentum of the .45 ACP. Nambu built a pistol for refinement and aesthetics. But war does not reward elegance. War rewards whatever keeps working in mud, blood, and chaos. When World War II erupted, the United States unleashed its full industrial power. Between 1941 and 1945, it produced nearly 2 million M1911A1 pistols. Through companies like Colt, Remington Rand, Ithaca, Union Switch and Signal, and even the Singer Sewing Machine Company. Every screw and spring was standardized. A Marine on Guadalcanal could swap a recoil spring from a Colt into an Ithaca, and the weapon would still function perfectly. Japan, blockaded by sea, could not do the same. Its factories suffered from material shortages and declining precision. Even worse, Japanese officers had to purchase their own sidearms. A Type 14 cost 78 yen, nearly 2 months of an officer's salary. For many, the pistol became a symbol of rank, not a weapon of survival. While the M1911A1 was the soldier's tool, the Nambu was merely an ornament of honor. M1911A1 230 grain bullet, 830 feet per second, about 355 foot-pounds of energy. Type 14 Nambu 100 grain bullet, 1,000 feet per second, only 220 foot-pounds of energy. The math was brutal. Each .45 ACP round carried 1.6 times more stopping power than the Nambu. In close combat, that meant the difference between life and death. The Nambu jammed easily in humidity and sand. Its safety required both hands to operate. A single grain of grit could disable it completely. The M1911A1, on the other hand, would still fire when soaked, when dropped in mud, or even when covered in blood. Its loose tolerances, criticized in peacetime, became its greatest advantage in war. Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien, born in Troy, New York, was known among his men for quiet resolve. He once told his soldiers, "We don't fall back, not because we're ordered to stay, but because behind us is America." On the opposite side, Colonel Yukio Saito, commander of the Japanese center line, ordered his men to die for the emperor. He knew he would not survive the day, but he also knew if Saipan fell, Japan would stand exposed. 2 men, 2 beliefs, 2 pistols, and between them, the fate of an empire. At 4:45 a.m., the earth shook with the roar of thousands. Tenno Heika Banzai. A wave of Japanese soldiers surged downhill. Officers with swords in front, riflemen behind them, and in their holsters, the fragile Nambu pistols. From the American side, O'Brien waited calmly, his fingers wrapped around the grips of both M1911A1s. He turned to the man beside him and whispered, "They're coming." Moments later, he gave the signal. Machine guns opened up, but still the human tide advanced. Then O'Brien stepped up from the trench, raised both pistols, and started firing. Each 45 ACP round hit like a hammer, dropping attackers instantly. When his magazines emptied, he reloaded with one hand, his other arm bleeding, and kept firing. His men watched in awe. They said the sound of the 45 was not a gunshot, it was a verdict. The difference between the 2 weapons was not just mechanical, it was psychological. The deep, resonant boom of the 45 ACP became infamous. Japanese soldiers called it the thunder punch. Prisoners later admitted, "When we heard that sound, we knew there was no escape." The Colt's reliability created courage. The Nambu's fragility created fear. And in war, courage spreads faster than bullets. After Saipan, American reports noted, no M1911A1 malfunctioned during the entire engagement. That reliability was not luck. It was mass production done perfectly. A nation capable of producing 1,000 pistols per hour, each tested by hand. Japan could no longer match it. By 1944, its factories were cutting corners. Wood grips replaced with plain slabs, steel alloys weakened by shortage, and finish quality collapsing under Allied bombing. Each pistol told the same story. One empire rising through precision, the other collapsing through desperation. When the smoke cleared, O'Brien was gone. He was found on a small ridge surrounded by more than 30 enemy bodies. Both pistols were empty. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. His story spread through the ranks like wildfire. From Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima, the name Colt 45 became synonymous with trust. To the Japanese, it was the monster that never died. To the Americans, it was a second heartbeat. As the sun rose over Saipan, the island became a graveyard of ideals. The 45 still echoed across the fields, while the Nambu clicked silently in the hands of the dead. The clash between two weapons and two ways of thinking had begun, and the result would decide more than just a battle. It would decide the fate of an entire empire. 4:30 a.m. The sky over Saipan was still black. No wind, no insects, no movement, just silence, so heavy that soldiers could hear their own heartbeat. Across the island's northern ridge, men of the U.S. 27th Infantry Division and the 2nd Marine Division gripped their rifles. They had spent the night waiting. They knew the Japanese would not surrender. The only question was when. At 4:45, a single cry shattered the stillness. Tenno, Heika, Banzai. Then came thousands more. Drums, trumpets, the thunder of boots. From the northern slopes, over 3,000 Japanese soldiers poured forward. Officers leading with drawn swords, riflemen with fixed bayonets, and some clutching their small Type 14 Nambu pistols at their sides. The human tide rushed across sugarcane fields through barbed wire and smoke. Many were drunk from the sake of their final night alive. They knew this would be their last charge. In the American trenches, Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien held his breath. He looked at the man beside him and whispered, "They're coming." When the distance closed to less than 100 meters, O'Brien gave the order. Machine guns erupted. M1919S chattered. Garands cracked in rhythm. But still the wave advanced. The ground trembled beneath the stampede. In the half-light, the Marines could finally see their faces, mud, blood, and madness. When the line broke, everything collapsed into hand-to-hand combat. O'Brien drew both pistols, left hand, right hand. He stepped into the open and fired. The first 45 ACP round hit a charging officer square in the chest. The man dropped instantly. Another came and fell the same way. Each shot echoed like a hammer strike. The 45 didn't pierce. It stopped. It delivered all its energy into flesh, snapping bodies backward, ending the fight in one pull of the trigger. A corporal later recalled, "They didn't scream or fall slowly. They just dropped, like someone switched them off." When his first magazines ran dry, O'Brien reloaded with one hand, his shoulder bleeding, fingers slick with blood. He kept firing. His men said the sound of the 45 was the only thing that kept them from breaking. Elsewhere on the field, Private Thomas A. Baker fought until he could no longer stand. When his M1 Garand broke, he pulled his M1911A1, 7 rounds, 7 kills. When the magazine emptied, he used the pistol as a club until it shattered. Badly wounded, Baker was dragged to a tree by his comrades. They left him a loaded M1911A1.5 smoked cigarette. When the battle ended, they found him there. The pistol was empty. 8 Japanese lay in a circle around him. 7 from the magazine, 1 from the chamber. All had been hit. All were dead. After 3 hours, the charge was over. 3,000 Japanese were dead, hundreds more wounded or dying. The field was a carpet of blood and bodies. The Americans lost roughly 650 men, but they held the line. An officer wrote in his diary, "No sound is like the 45. When you hear it, you know someone is still alive." Saipan exposed every flaw of the Type 14 Nambu. Its trigger pull was long and heavy. It had no slide lock, so users never knew when the gun was empty. Its safety required two hands, and worst of all, it couldn't fire without a magazine. If the magazine was lost or damaged, the pistol became useless. American engineers who examined it later said, "A gun that looks like a pistol but acts like a riddle." The M1911A1, by contrast, was brutally simple. One hand, one motion, one shot. It was made to survive, not to impress. The 45 ACP's effect was not just physical, it was psychological. Its deep, heavy boom carried farther than any small caliber weapon. Japanese soldiers called it the Thunder Punch. Captured diaries revealed their fear. "When we hear that sound, we know death is near." Throughout the Pacific, the sound of the M1911A1 became a warning. It silenced ambushes, it broke morale, and it told both sides the same truth. The man with the 45 had already decided to live. By Saipan, Japan's logistics were collapsing. Ammunition for the Nambu was scarce, often corroded, and impossible to replace once lost. Its 8 by 22 millimeter round was unique to Japan. No substitutes, no allies to supply it. Meanwhile, American factories poured out millions of .45 ACP cartridges a month, each identical, tested, and shipped worldwide. This was not just production, it was destiny written in steel. A war of ideology had become a war of factories. Medical reports from Saipan noted a grim contrast. Japanese soldiers hit by 45 rounds died instantly, while Americans hit by Nambu rounds often survived. A Marine officer summed it up simply, "We didn't win because we fired faster. We won because every bullet meant something." When the battle ended, Saipan was a wasteland. Over 29,000 Japanese soldiers lay dead. Only 921 prisoners were taken alive. Most wounded, some unconscious. For the Americans, Saipan opened the sky to Tokyo. For Japan, it opened the door to collapse. But for the men who fought there, it was not a map coordinate. It was a memory. A place where one pistol proved that engineering could decide who lived to see tomorrow. A lieutenant wrote in his diary, "I never thought a sidearm could mean so much until I saw O'Brien still firing when everyone else was gone." Days later, cleanup teams walked through burnt fields. They found broken Arisaka rifles, blood-stained katanas, and hundreds of Nambu pistols jammed with mud or rusted shut. A U.S. ordnance officer wrote, "The Nambu was built by men who valued honor over mechanics." From that day, the U.S. military called the M1911A1 the gold standard of reliability. Reports concluded simply, "No major changes required, just keep making them." Historians later described Saipan as the study of firepower versus spirit. Pearl Harbor had shown Japan's arrogance. Saipan revealed its cost. The M1911A1 became more than a weapon. It became a symbol of survival. When everything else failed, soldiers trusted the pistol that never lied. A Marine later said, "If the 45 still fired, there was still a way out." After the battle, soldiers began to call the M1911A1 by a new name, the Hand of God, because when all else failed, it was still there, heavy and faithful. They believed that as long as the Colt was in their holster, they still had a chance to go home. And perhaps that belief itself saved more lives than the bullets did. By noon, the American flag rose over the island. Survivors sat in silence, cleaning blood from their hands and weapons. Some placed the two pistols, Colt and Nambu, side by side, studying the difference. They looked nothing alike, yet together they told the story of the war itself. One side built for survival, the other built for sacrifice. The Japanese would call Saipan the Island of Ghosts. The Americans would call it the turning point of the Pacific. And the men who fought there, when asked years later which pistol was the best in the world, simply smiled and said, "The Colt 45, because it never betrayed us." July 7th, 1944, Saipan. After the storm of men came silence. No cheering, no movement, only the thick smell of blood and burnt powder drifting across the fields. The morning sun revealed what no one could ever forget. Thousands of bodies tangled in the mud, some still twitching, some with their hands still gripping broken rifles. Among them, pistols, Colt M1911A1s still smoking, Type 14 Nambus jammed and useless. The battle was over, but the island had become a graveyard of honor. The largest Banzai charge of the Pacific War had ended in less than 3 hours. Over 3,000 Japanese soldiers were dead. Many had charged unarmed, carrying swords or grenades for suicide. They had believed death in honor was victory, but in reality they left behind a sea of corpses. Inside the American lines, the stench of burnt powder still hung in the air. Men sat in silence, staring at nothing. No one said, "We won." They only understood one thing. Hell had passed and somehow they were still alive. When they found Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien, he lay on a small rise surrounded by more than 30 enemy bodies. Both of his pistols were empty. He had fought until the last round. On Saipan, the Colt 45 had spoken louder than any words of courage. Sergeant Edward McCarthy from Texas survived that morning. He called his pistol the Cold Iron. "When you hold it," he said, "you feel you still have a chance. It's heavy, cold, and honest. It doesn't lie." After Saipan, McCarthy noticed something strange. Men trusted their M1911A1s more than any other weapon. They carried them not because they were out of rifles, but because they trusted what would always fire. In the caves and bunkers across the island, wounded Japanese officers hid, clutching their Type 14 Nambus. Many tried to end their lives with them, but some pistols failed to fire. A U.S. intelligence report noted, several Japanese officers were found dead, with bullet wounds to the temple, but the Nambu beside them still held a live round. The firing pin had struck too weakly to ignite the primer. They finished themselves with grenades instead. Tests after the war confirmed it. The Nambu's trigger pull was twice as heavy as the M1911, and its safety rusted easily in humidity. It was more than a weapon's failure. It was the death of a nation's belief in its own steel. 2 days after the Banzai, American soldiers began collecting the dead. The temperature climbed above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Bodies decomposed so fast that the smell clung to uniforms for weeks. A lieutenant wrote in his diary, "This isn't war anymore. It's the graveyard of humanity." Teams recovered dozens of Nambus, caked in mud, and M1911A1s that still work flawlessly. An ordnance officer reported, all 27 recovered .45 pistols operated normally, even after immersion in seawater and sand. That was not luck. That was engineering. One story spread through the division. An American soldier found O'Brien's Colt. Scratched onto the steel slide, with a knife were the words, "Saipan, July 44. This one never failed me." The pistol now rests in the museum at Fort Benning. It's not displayed as a weapon, but as a reminder of a man's faith in something that worked, when nothing else did. In the western cliffs of Saipan, thousands of Japanese civilians and soldiers hid in caves, believing capture meant torture. When American loudspeakers begged them to surrender, they refused. Entire families jumped from the cliffs, mothers holding infants, fathers saluting the emperor. The place is still known today as Suicide Cliff. A soldier wrote home, "I'll never forget that sound. Hundreds of people falling at once. No victory is worth that." Saipan was not just a battlefield, it was hell inside paradise. When news of Saipan reached Tokyo, Prime Minister Hideki Tojo resigned. Japan's leadership realized the impossible truth. The homeland was now exposed. A surviving officer later wrote, "We fought with spirit, but spirit cannot pull a rusted trigger. Amid the heat and the flies, Americans began burying their dead. Many soldiers buried their pistols with their comrades. A sergeant remembered, we buried O'Brien with both of his 45s, one in his right hand, one in his holster. None of us could take them away." After Saipan, Pacific Command issued new orders. Increase M1911A1 sidearm allocation to officers and assault teams, minimum 20% of each unit. It wasn't only about firepower, it was about psychology. Reports showed soldiers carrying the 45 were less likely to panic when ambushed. Trust in a weapon had become trust in survival itself. Japan had spent 18 years building 400,000 Nambus. The United States made nearly 2 million M1911A1s in just 3, each perfectly interchangeable. That was not merely production efficiency, it was the philosophy that mass precision equals saved lives. A nation that could standardize a weapon could also standardize survival. Many who survived Saipan never truly came home. They spoke of screams, of the smell of burning flesh, of the sound of the 45 echoing in the dark. Some could never touch a gun again. Others said the Colt sound was the only thing that let them sleep, because it reminded them they had once lived through hell. In 1945, when the war ended, veterans brought their M1911A1s back to America. Some kept them in drawers, some framed them beside photographs of lost friends. They said the pistol was not made of steel anymore. It was made of memory. Today, inside the National Museum of the Marine Corps, a small display is titled "The Pistols of Saipan." Behind glass sit 2 weapons, an American M1911A1, etched with O'Brien's name, and a rusted Type 14 Nambu, its trigger frozen. Below them, a plaque reads, "2 weapons, 2 worlds, 1 lesson. Engineering can forge life or death." After Saipan, the M1911A1 was sent everywhere. Okinawa, the Philippines, Iwo Jima. Wherever there was mud, blood, and fear, it fired. Soldiers began saying, "If the 45 still works, I still live." In that belief, a pistol became a form of faith. Sometimes faith in steel was all they had left. That night, after the fighting stopped, a Marine sat alone in his foxhole, cleaning his pistol by lantern light. He ran a rag along its scarred slide and whispered, "Thank you for firing." No one answered. Only the reflection of the flame shimmered across the metal, a silent reminder that in war a man doesn't just fight the enemy, he fights himself. Saipan's victory was built on technology, industry, and discipline, but it came with a price, the realization. That perfection in killing also perfects the tragedy of death. When mankind forges the perfect weapon, it must also ask what kind of peace will follow. Saipan is not merely a point on a map. It is the proof that intelligence and engineering can save men or destroy them. Between the M1911A1 and the Nambu, the world chose one side, the side of precision, reliability, and survival. When an old veteran was once asked, "What kept you alive?" he smiled, touched his worn holster, and said, "Because that one never left me." July 9, 1944. Over the island of Saipan, an American flag flutters in the humid breeze. But it is not a moment of triumph. It is the end of hell. News of Saipan's fall reached Tokyo within 48 hours. For Japan's leaders, it was more than defeat. It was revelation. With the Marianas lost, American bombers could now strike the Japanese homeland directly. The headline in Asahi Shimbun was short: "The situation on Saipan is grave." Behind those few words, panic spread through the imperial cabinet. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo resigned. The myth of Japan's invincibility was shattered forever. But across the Pacific, in tents, bases, and ships, American soldiers were speaking of something else. Not strategy, but a pistol. The stories of Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien and Private Tom Baker spread across every division. Two men who fought to their last breath with their M1911A1 pistols. Soon the weapon became more than a sidearm. It became faith. A Marine officer wrote, "When a man knows his gun will fire, he fights differently, calm, steady, and sure." That reliability turned into courage, and that courage became legend. In the ruins of the Japanese army, the Type 14 Nambu became a symbol of failure. American troops captured thousands. Most jammed, rusted, or cracked. Some had never even been fired. A U.S. Ordnance report stated, "The Type 14 Nambu reflects a dying industry, over-designed, underpowered, and unreliable." Meanwhile, M1911A1s from the same year were still working flawlessly in the field. The contrast could not be clearer. One nation built for endurance, the other for pride. April 1945. Okinawa, the final and bloodiest battle of the Pacific. For 82 days, the island burned. More than 100,000 Japanese soldiers died, and 12,000 Americans with them. In the caves and tunnels, combat took place at arm's length. The .45 returned, not as a backup weapon, but as the weapon of survival. A sergeant remembered, when a man jumped from the shadows, there was no time to reload the Garand. The Colt 45 decided who lived. At Okinawa, the .45 ACP didn't just kill, it ended nightmares before they began. By war's end, the United States had produced nearly 1.9 million M1911A1 pistols, while Japan had managed fewer than 400,000 Nambus. In nearly 2 decades, that difference was not just arithmetic, it was destiny. Mass production became the measure of life. For every American pistol that fired, a soldier's chance of returning home increased. Many of those M1911A1s weren't built by gunmakers. They came from Remington Rand, Ithaca, Union Switch and Signal, and even the Singer Sewing Machine Company. From sewing machines to pistols. That was the transformation of a nation. Every worker on the line knew that precision meant survival. One woman in New York wrote to a soldier, "If your pistol has an S stamped on it, I built it. I hope it fires and I hope you come home." That is how America fought its war. Not only with men, but with the hands of millions who never saw the front. In February 1945, the Torimatsu factory produced the final batch of Type 14 Nambus. No grooves on the grips, no polish. Made from recycled metal taken from bomb fragments. They cracked in training. Some exploded when fired. They were the final echo of a collapsing empire. A Japanese general wrote in his diary, "We have no guns, no oil, no steel. But we still have the heart of the warrior. But hearts cannot stop bullets." When Hiroshima burned on August 6th and Nagasaki followed 3 days later, Japan's final illusion disappeared. The empire's defeat had not begun with the atomic bomb. It had begun here, on the sands of Saipan a year earlier, when technology proved stronger than honor. September 2nd, 1945. Tokyo Bay. Aboard the battleship USS Missouri, General Douglas MacArthur signed the instrument of surrender. On the hips of the American officers stood M1911A1 pistols. the same design that had fought from France to the Pacific. The war ended as it had been fought with precision, discipline, and steel that never failed. After the war, thousands of veterans brought their Colts home. Some kept them in drawers. Some displayed them beside photos of lost brothers. Each weapon carried a story. One veteran said quietly, "We didn't win because we were better men. We won because our guns worked." To them, the pistol was not a weapon anymore. It was a witness a piece of memory shaped by fire. The M1911A1 was never replaced easily. It served in Korea, Vietnam, and even modern Iraq. Over 70 years later, special forces still use it for close quarters combat. No other pistol in history has lasted so long. Not because it was perfect, but because it always did what it was meant to do. An engineer once said, "Browning didn't just design a pistol. He designed a standard." The Type 14 disappeared after 1945. No army adopted it again. Its remaining examples sit in museums, silent reminders of a fatal mistake. It teaches one truth: no courage, no spirit can make up for poor design. In the modern world, steel must be as honest as the man who holds it. Between the Colt 45 and the Nambu lay the entire philosophy of the war. For the Americans, technology and precision. For the Japanese, honor and sacrifice. Both fought believing they were right. Both bled believing they were righteous. But only one side built a weapon that could keep its promise. John Moses Browning died in 1926, long before the war that proved his genius. He never saw his pistol save thousands of lives. But every time a hammer struck a primer, his idea lived again. His principle was simple. A weapon does not need to be perfect. It only needs to be honest. And on every battlefield from France to Saipan, his honesty fired again and again. In a museum in Washington, there is a black and white photograph. Two soldiers sit back to back in a foxhole. One sleeps, the other cleans his M1911A1. The caption reads, "Saipan, 1944, 2 survivors after 3,000 deaths." No one knows their names, but the image says everything. War is not won by numbers, but by the hands that refuse to give up. History shows 2 paths. One side worships spirit and sacrifice, the other precision and efficiency. Saipan, Okinawa, Hiroshima. Each proved the same truth: spirit without technology is tragedy. Technology without humanity is horror. The M1911A1 and the Nambu stand as the 2 extremes of that truth. One was made to save, the other to die with. Years after the war, a reporter asked General Joseph Stilwell, "What truly won the Pacific?" He replied, "Our guns worked. Theirs didn't." Cold words, but behind them a painful truth. In war, steel often outlives flesh. By 1951, Japan rebuilt. Factories that once forged weapons now made cameras, radios, and cars. The same hands that once built the Nambu now built peace, the M1911. A1 endured, in films, in collections, in memory. From an instrument of war, it became a symbol of precision and resilience, and perhaps of redemption. Today, Saipan is quiet again. Palm trees sway where bunkers once stood. At the cliffs, a wooden plaque reads, "To those who fought and fell here, may peace guard your rest." When the sun sets, light glints off a single relic buried in the sand. A piece of parkerized steel, faded but unbroken. The island remembers. So does the weapon that never failed. World War II taught humanity many lessons. About courage, about sacrifice, and about the limits of honor. But above all, it taught that belief must be crafted with the same care as a weapon. the M1911. A1 stands not only for war, but for a truth that outlasts it. When purpose meets precision, even steel can become faith. On Saipan, amid the smoke and the screams, men carried that faith in their hands. And when dawn came, many survived because their steel did not betray them.